Flyers did really well in the draft this year. I'm excited to talk about it. In the second round, the Flyers traded up to select smallish forward, right winger, Bobby Brink. Now, Brink is a really interesting selection. The Flyers moved their second at 45 and their third later in the draft to select Bobby Brink. Now, Bobby Brink is an interesting player because he's slightly undersized and he has some flaws to his game. However, his ceiling is very high. It's pretty clear and pretty evident that he has a really elite skill set, at least offensively. Defensively, he's aggressive, which is a really good sign, and he has really good stick work. His mind seems to be pretty solid for the game, so I understand why he was initially ranked in the top 20 of this draft. So the Flyers to select him at 34 could be one of the biggest steals in the end. The reason he kind of dropped all the way to the second round is because of his skating. And it's not so much that he's a bad skater, it's that he doesn't really have this kind of finesse in his stride. He looks like he kind of takes these small, little, lazy strides. Now, I don't want to call him lazy because he's definitely not a lazy player. It just seems that way when he skates. Now, this could be an issue because he's smaller, and not just smaller, he doesn't really have the muscle that strength a lot of the more elite forwards that kind of have a larger combination. He does remind people of Cole Caulfield. I don't say I completely agree with that. What I see is more of a playmaker. Caulfield is more of a pure shooter. I do understand why people are excited and why it makes people feel a little bit better after passing Caulfield, because it does seem like Brink has a pretty high ceiling when it comes to offensively. Could he end up being Sam Gagner? That's possible. That's another player who was picking really high in the draft, actually. Slightly undersized, elite skill set, but really couldn't translate it to his game for, various reasons. But he also played middle, a little tougher for a player of that size to kind of be a centerman in general. But even translating Gagner's game to the wing, he still was never that successful. A couple good seasons, but really couldn't translate. I do see a higher ceiling for Brink, though. But it's kind of up to him. His stride and his skating is absolutely fixable. If you look at him, he looks pretty young. He is not physically developed. He will take longer than some people will like. His skill set is already that to play at the AHL level probably, but his body, his conditioning will have to improve. As most young players, it's not really so much a knock on him, but if he really wants to hit that point where he's a top 6 forward in the NHL, he's going to have to fix his skating. Now, I don't mean fix as far as being able to balance himself and kind of stay on his feet. I mean, he's going to have to learn how to kind of separate himself from a lot of forwards. If you have a large, skilled forward, he's going to eat up a guy like Bobby Brink, right? Brink can try all the maneuvering, but players at the NHL already know how to do that and already know how to play against players who do that. So it's kind of key for him to be able to separate himself on foot. It does seem like a great pick, though. I'm not surprised that the Flyers kind of went for quality over quantity this year. I would, at this point, with the Flyers' depth in their system, there's really no reason to go anything but that. And Bobby Brink is a great selection, right? They moved their second and their third pick to select him, and for a reason. I had some time to see him at Dev Camp, and he was really impressive. He actually played in the 5-on-5 tournament with Morgan Frost and Isaac Ratcliffe, and that line kind of dominated and brought back or brought up a comeback for the orange team versus the white team. It was a pretty even game, but once that line kind of got on board with one another and how they operated, it was noticeable they had chemistry. And again, he's playing with two elite prospects as well, especially Morgan Frost. You do see a lot of skill in Bobby Brink. If he can increase his speed, his separation speed, and improve his stride, he could be the steal of the draft. It's possible. He also could be just a really good player, and they're like, yeah, that's why we initially had him rated in the second round. So I don't know if it's so much a steal as it just a lot of people were hesitant because of size. But again, Caulfield with that skill set, which if you watch his shot, that doesn't come around quite often. It's a very unique shot, especially as a one-timer coming off the wing. Most teams would benefit from a player like that. So Bobby Brink has the same ability to kind of shoot. He doesn't have the same power, and he's also not as aggressive to kind of score. He seems like he wants to kind of make a good play. He can be a little too aggressive to make a play. But again, a really solid playmaker coming up the wing. He's a little different than Konechny. Konechny has a lot of the same skill set, but Konechny's a little faster. And it's something you remember. Konechny was initially knocked for not being a good skater. I never saw that in him. I don't think that was ever true, at least from what I saw of him. He was always fast and had the ability to separate. Now, Bobby Brink could change that next year for all I know. Konechny was weighed in at, I think, at 180 at 5'9", right? So he was already more physically developed. Bobby Brink could take a jump. Again, he's 17 years old. So, and he looks like he's 14, It looks like he'd be lying about his age, but overall, the kid has got some serious skills, and was a really good pick in this year's draft, and really made the Flyers' top 2 picks, kind of solidify them to take elite potential forward and elite potential defenseman in the same top, in the top 34, 35, right? It's essentially a first-round pick at this point. You have 31 teams in the league, and there's a kind of a give and take there. There isn't a huge difference between a guy at 30 and a guy at 35. It's really just your preference on what you want for these guys. And I would say even in this type of draft till 40, right? So the Flyers are going to trade up and catch this guy who was available. Arthur Kaliev was available right before that. I think the Flyers kind of saw an opportunity. Let's add another elite forward to this group. We don't really need quantity. We have a very full cabinet. And if this year's development camp was an exposure of the level of talent. You can just kind of look around the room and see how many guys have NHL upside. It's very impressive. And they don't all have to be elite to have NHL upside. A lot of these guys could be bottom-end players. They could be just top-end AHL players. But again, those guys are hard to convert. They're a lot harder than people think. Most players from NHL drafts don't even sniff the NHL. So if you are projected to sniff the NHL or see that you have an NHL skill set, that's a pretty big deal.